Well, we'll get to that reversal, and I think also like in addition, I mean, you just summarized the Soviet dimension really well, but I think you also really document, and put your book in relationship with like Quinn Slobodian's book on the sort of creation of this global market order, not as, again, actually it's another counter naturalization project, because it isn't just like, oh, let's just unleash the market and let it do its thing. It's actually a very specific way of writing the global rules that favor basically multinational corporations and capital, essentially, at the expense, in fact, of like the global shop floor, and increasingly not only in Africa and Latin America, but really, now it's like some ways these policies have like migrated back to where they emanated from, right? And we see this in these like decimations across the board. But before we get there, and maybe a good way of bridging it is you talk really specifically about that these leaders, in addition to their understanding of how the world worked and their global solidarity, that they turned to this entirely new set of, or not entirely new, institutions that they were creating themselves, or they tried to leverage and recreate the United Nations as a vehicle for this kind of politics. And that was the sort of where the rubber met the road of this effort.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think Quinn Slobodian's book, Globalists, is a nice counterpoint to this book, because in some ways I think one of the things we should think about framing the post-war period is not as nationalist projects against internationalism, but really very competing conceptions of what the international order ought to look like, what it was supposed to guarantee, right? And so the set of figures I look at, again, come into the post-war period, having developed an argument that empire is really a structure of international racial hierarchy. It doesn't matter, simply receiving national independence would not actually guarantee you independence and equality in the international sphere. And exemplary for them in this case was the instance of, Liberia, Ethiopia, and Haiti, all independent Black states, had been independent and recognized since the interwar period. But in the 20th century, Haiti would be under U.S. occupation for 19 years. Liberia was basically a protectorate of the United States and almost subject to military intervention. And of course, Ethiopia would be invaded and occupied by Italy in 1935. So they come with this acute sense that the liberal international order as it exists actually perpetuates hierarchy, perpetuates legal hierarchy by creating unequal relations between states or unequal membership for states. It perpetuates economic dependence because these post-colonial or colonial societies are basically producing primary goods for the market, and that this economic dependence means that they can't ever be politically independent, right? They're always subject to the vagaries of the international market and to the kind of encroachments and interventions of powerful states. So this is the kind of problem that they want to kind of overcome. And they do a couple of things. One is to try and transform the UN structure itself, right? And how do they do this? I alluded to this earlier, but they try to make sure that there is actually that sovereign equality or equal membership can be a central part of the UN. So the right to self-determination is one effort at guaranteeing this equal membership. The right to self-determination is a claim that there can be, self-determination is, in their words, the first human right. There can't be any precursors or arguments about backwardness, underdevelopment that prevents people from securing their self-determination, from being independent, right? And if that's the case, and if all peoples have that right to self-determination, there should be equality of membership for states within the UN system, right? And so this claim of kind of legal equality would manifest in these efforts to either transform this membership in the Security Council, or to try and to make the General Assembly, where there was equal decision-making power, the site of kind of legislation. To imagine that the General Assembly, where there was one vote, one state, the parliamentary power of this new post-imperial world order. The second project that they're engaged in, and I think this is really important because, we tend to read anti-colonial nationalists as just straightforwardly defenders of the nation state, right? Mm-hmm. People who wanted kind of non-intervention, who were committed to the sovereign state model. But the second project that they're involved in is this effort to create regional federations. Ghana's Republican Constitution of 1960 has a clause in it that says, once we create a union of African states, we will surrender our sovereignty to the regional federation, right? In the West Indies, before Trinidad or Jamaica gained independence in 1962, 10 Anglophone Caribbean states actually constituted a federation with a constitution, a parliament that sat in Port of Spain between 1958 and 1962. So these models, although they failed, what they were trying to do with these models of regional federation was to basically create larger, more diverse economies that would be less dependent, that would gradually be less dependent on kind of the external market, right? So if Jamaica on itself was a small economy that couldn't, or Trinidad was a small economy that couldn't undergo the process of development on its own, like could it do it in these larger formations with a federal state organizing regional development, right? And their model for this, very ironically, was the American Federalists. Right. So you see figures like Eric Williams and Kwame Nkrumah reading the Federalist Papers, especially the contributions of Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, as the basis for the kind of economy that they want to build. So that's the second project. And then I think the most ambitious project is the one we've talked a bit about, which is the new international economic order of the 1970s. Now, this project takes that argument about equality, legal equality I discussed a little earlier, and says this is actually now going to be the basis for demands for economic redistribution, right, on the international stage. So the argument here is that if global trade perpetually produces structural inequality, can we create corrective mechanisms, just like the welfare state did in the domestic context, that could balance these forms of inequality, right? And so this involved everything from commodity agreements and commodity associations that would set the kind of prices of the primary goods that post-colonial states were selling, to allowances for nationalization and compensatory financing for when the prices of these goods did fall.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.